25 weird facts about the 1962 Chevrolet Bel Air 409 bubble top. Do you remember the first time you heard a 409 clear its throat at a stoplight? Back in 1962, one plain-looking Chevrolet became the most feared machine in America. Today we're exploring 25 weird facts about the 1962 Bel Air 409 bubble top that most folks have never heard. The bubble top was a hand-me-down. Let's start with something that confuses people to this day. In 1961, that gorgeous thin-pillared bubble roof belonged to the Impala, but when 1962 rolled around, Chevrolet gave the Impala a brand new squared-off formal roof, the one styled to look like a raised convertible top. The old bubble roof didn't die, though. Chevrolet quietly moved it down the ladder to the mid-priced Bel Air two-door hardtop. That's right, the cheaper car got the prettier roof. Nobody at General Motors thought much of it at the time. It was simply a way to squeeze one more year out of existing tooling before retiring it. But that little accounting decision created one of the most beloved body styles in Chevrolet history. For 1962 only, if you wanted that airy glass greenhouse on a full-size Chevy hardtop, you had to skip the flashy Impala and order the humble Bel Air. 60 years later, that hand-me-down roof is worth a fortune. Chevrolet never called it a bubble top. Here's something that surprises even longtime Chevy folks. Walk into a dealership in 1962 and ask for a bubble top and the salesman might have given you a puzzled look. Chevrolet's official name for this body style was simply the Sport Coupe. The bubble top nickname came from the street, from the guys at the drive-in and the drag strip who looked at that thin pillared roof with its huge wraparound rear window and thought it looked like a glass bubble sitting on the body. There was no B-pillar at all, so with the windows rolled down, the whole side of the car opened up like a convertible. The name stuck because it was perfect, and it spread the way all good car names did back then, from one parking lot to the next. Decades later, auction houses, magazines, and collectors all use the term as if it came straight from the factory. It never did. It's one of those rare cases where the customers name the car better than the company ever could. The roof was never meant to be clear. Now here's a strange one. With a name like Bubble Top, plenty of folks over the years have assumed Chevrolet originally planned some kind of clear plexiglass roof, like the dream cars on the show circuit in the 1950s. General Motors had actually built clear roof show cars and even sold plexiglass-roofed Ford rivals a few years earlier, so the idea wasn't crazy. But the production bubble top was always steel up top, and for a very practical reason. A clear roof turns a car into a greenhouse in the summer sun, and in 1962, air conditioning was still a rare, expensive option that most buyers skipped. So the bubble effect came entirely from the glass around you, that tall windshield, the slim pillars, and that enormous curved backlight. Sitting inside one on a summer evening felt open and airy in a way almost no modern car can match. You got the bubble experience without baking like a Sunday roast. The 409 started life as a truck engine. The legendary 409 didn't begin as a race engine at all. It was born from the 348 cubic inch W Series V8 that Chevrolet introduced back in 1958, an engine designed with heavy passenger cars and trucks in mind. That's right, the motor that terrorized drag strips across America shared its bones with engines that spent their lives hauling gravel. For 1961, Chevrolet's engineers bored and stroked the 348 out to 409 cubic inches, giving it a 4.31-inch bore and a 3.5-inch stroke, along with better breathing through bigger valves. The distinctive scalloped valve covers gave the W engine family its nickname. Legend has it Zora Arkus Duntov's performance crew had a hand in hot rodding every engine in the Chevrolet lineup during those years. So when your neighbor's kid pulled up in his rumbling 409 in 1962, he was essentially driving a truck engine that went to finishing school. Nobody dared tell him that at the time. 1 horsepower per cubic inch. In 1962, the top 409 made exactly 409 horsepower from 409 cubic inches, and that number was pure marketing gold. 1 horsepower per cubic inch was the magic benchmark of the era, a badge of engineering honor that Chevrolet had first hit with the fuel-injected 283 back in 1957. Getting there with the big W engine took serious hardware, a pair of aluminum Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetors on an aluminum intake, big 2.19-inch intake valves, solid lifters, high compression, and a forged steel crankshaft underneath it all. Think about that. In an era when the family Biscayne 6 made around 135 horsepower, this engine made 3 times that. And the number itself became the car's identity. Nobody said they owned a Bel Air Sport Coupe. They said they owned a 409, and everybody within earshot knew exactly what that meant. Few engines in history have been so perfectly named by their own displacement. There were actually 2 409s in 1962. When folks talk about the 1962 409, they almost always mean the famous dual quad screamer. But Chevrolet actually sold 2 versions that year, and the difference matters. The base 409 wore a single Carter 4-barrel and was rated at a very healthy 380 horsepower, up from 360 the year before. Step up to the dual quad version, and you got those 2 4-barrels, larger intake valves, and the full 409 horsepower rating. Both were badged as turbo-fire engines, and both came with solid lifters that demanded regular valve adjustments. Here's the weird part. From the outside, a 380 horse car and a 409 horse car looked absolutely identical. Same fender flags, same quiet body. The only way to know what you were lining up against at a stoplight was to wait for the flag to drop. More than a few brave souls found out the hard way that the car next to them had the second carburetor. Racers skipped the Impala on purpose. Here's a fact that says everything about how serious drag racers thought in 1962. The Impala SS was the glamour car, the one with the bucket seats and the flash, but the hardcore racers ordered the plainer Bel Air, and some went even cheaper with the Biscayne. Why? Wait, plain and simple. Every piece of trim, every bit of extra sound deadener, and bright work on the Impala was dead weight on the quarter mile. The Bel Air bubble top had another advantage the boxy new Impala roof couldn't offer. Many racers believed that sleek, sloping roofline cut through the air more cleanly at the top end of the strip. So the smart money bought the mid-level car, checked the box for the biggest engine, and skipped nearly everything else. A stripped Bel Air with a 409 was the 1962 version of a sleeper, a plain brown wrapper hiding an absolute monster. The flashy guys bought Impalas, the fast guys bought Bel Airs, the Beach Boys made it immortal. On June 4, 1962, Capitol Records released a single called Surfin' Safari by a young band called the Beach Boys. Flip that record over, and on the B-side sat a 2-minute song called 409. She's real fine, my 409, they sang, and just like that, a car became a pop culture legend. The song name-checked the exact hardware, a 4-speed dual quad, Positraction 409, which was practically an order sheet set to music. That little B-side is widely credited with kicking off the entire hot rod music craze of the 1960s, paving the way for songs about Little Deuce Coupes and GTOs. Think about how rare that is. Plenty of cars have appeared in songs, but almost none had a hit written about the engine option code. Did you have that record spinning on your turntable back in 1962? Tell us in the comments, and tell us what part of the country you were cruising in. The engine on the record wasn't a 409. Now here's the weirdest twist in the whole story. That thundering engine you hear revving on the Beach Boys record? It wasn't a 409 at all. The song was born because Brian Wilson's writing partner Gary Usher was a certified car nut who loved the 409 Chevy. Wanting a real engine sound, the boys gathered around 2 in the morning outside the Wilson family home in Hawthorne, California. Brian rolled a tape recorder out to the front lawn while Gary made passes up and down the street, laying rubber in his Chevy. A neighbor reportedly stepped outside and told them to knock it off, but they got their recording. The catch is that Usher's car carried the older 348W engine, not the mighty 409. So the most famous 409 sound in history is actually its little brother doing an impression. Millions of listeners never knew the difference, and honestly the family resemblance was close enough. Dyno Don made it famous first. Before the Beach Boys ever sang a note, a quiet tuner from California put the 409 on the map. Don Nicholson, known to everyone as Dyno Don for his mastery of the chassis dynamometer, took delivery of one of the very first 409 Chevrolets and hauled it to the 1961 NHRA Winter Nationals at Pomona. He and just a handful of other Chevy drivers waded into a field full of Fords and stunned the establishment, with Nicholson running 12-second passes in what looked like Grandpa's grocery getter. Then in 1962, driving for Chevrolet with a new model, he did it again, repeating as Winter Nationals champion and becoming a household name in racing circles. Promoters down south started throwing money at him for match races, so much money that he eventually packed up and moved to Atlanta, just to keep up with the bookings. One man, one engine, and suddenly every Ford and Mopar racer in America had a Chevrolet problem. The 500-mile midnight break-in trick. Dyno Don didn't just drive fast, he thought fast, and this story proves it. Before the 1961 Winter Nationals, Nicholson didn't take delivery of his new Bel Air until the day before the race. Most men would have panicked. Nicholson calmly diagnosed a problem nobody else had even considered. The brand new suspension would be too stiff, and a stiff front end wouldn't transfer weight to the rear tires on launch, killing his traction off the line. His solution? He handed the keys to a crew member and had him drive that brand new car roughly 500 miles through the night just to wear in the front shocks and coil springs before morning. Imagine that, breaking in a race car by lapping the highways of Southern California until dawn. It worked too. The softened front end squatted just right, the tires hooked, and the rest is history. That's the kind of backyard genius that built American drag racing. Old Reliable was a Bel Air. If one race car defined the 1962 season, it was a white Bel Air out of York, Pennsylvania, called Old Reliable. The car was owned and sponsored by Ammon Smith Chevrolet, driven by a young charger named Dave Strickler, and tuned by a then-unknown mechanic named Bill Jenkins, who the world would soon know as Grumpy. Think about that combination for a moment. One of the most famous names in drag racing history, Grumpy Jenkins, cut his teeth wrenching on a 409 Bel Air for a small-town Chevy dealer, and the car earned its name honestly. At the big Indy Nationals that year, Strickler beat fellow 409 star Hayden Proffitt to take the Super Stock crown, while Proffitt grabbed Stock Eliminator honors of his own. Chevrolets driven by Strickler, Nicholson, Proffitt, Dick Harrell, and Ronnie Sox were suddenly everywhere in the winner's circle, and a whole lot of them were wearing that humble Bel Air badge. The secret aluminum front ends. Here's a fact most people never knew even back then. In 1962, Chevrolet quietly supplied roughly 20 sets of lightweight aluminum front-end body panels to its top drag racers. Hoods, fenders, the works, stamped in aluminum instead of steel to slice precious pounds off the nose of the car. Cars like Strickler's Old Reliable ran these featherweight panels in the factory experimental classes, and along with special intake manifolds, revised heads, and hotter camshafts, they could rip off quarter miles in the mid-12-second range at over 110 miles per hour. Officially, Chevrolet wasn't in racing. Unofficially, parts kept finding their way to the right people. Some folks call these the Z11 cars, but here's the technical truth. The official Z11 option package didn't arrive until 1963. The 1962 pieces were the dress rehearsal, handed out quietly through the back door. General Motors said one thing in public and shipped aluminum fenders in private. Just how rare was a real 409? Let's talk numbers because they tell you everything. Records from the GM engine plant in Tonawanda, New York show that 15,019 409 engines were produced for 1962. Of those, only 8909 actually went into new cars on the assembly line. The rest, about 6,110 engines, were set aside for warranty service and over-the-counter sales, feeding the racers and hot rodders who lined up at parts counters across the country. Now put that against the bigger picture. Chevrolet built well over 1 million full-size cars that year. That means genuine factory 409 cars were a drop in the ocean, and 409 Bel Air bubble tops were rarer still. Odds are your town had one, maybe two, and everybody knew exactly whose driveway it sat in. When one rumbled past the diner, conversation stopped mid-sentence, because you might not see another for months. If these facts are bringing the memories flooding back, you are exactly who we make these for. Do us one small favor and subscribe so the next trip down memory lane finds you. That is all we ask. Now back to it. The Impala was supposed to keep it. Here's a piece of boardroom history that almost changed everything. When the 409 debuted, Chevrolet's original plan was to restrict the engine to the Impala, keeping the hottest hardware in the flagship model where the profit margins lived. It was a tidy marketing plan, and demand blew it to pieces almost immediately. Once Dyno Don and the other racers showed what the engine could do, orders poured in from buyers who wanted the power without the price tag, and dealers wanted to sell it to them. Chevrolet gave in and opened the option book, letting the 409 slide into the cheaper Bel Air and even the bare-bones Biscayne. Without that decision, the Bel Air 409 bubble top, arguably the most desirable full-size Chevy of the era, simply would not exist. Sometimes the customer really does know best. The bean counters wanted exclusivity, America wanted horsepower at a working man's price, and America won that argument. They called it the 09. Every legend gets a street name, and the 409 collected a few. In hot rod slang of the day, the dual quad version was sometimes known as the 0909, a nod to the beautiful coincidence of 409 cubic inches making 409 horsepower. Around drive-ins and parts counters, guys just called the whole family the W motor after the W-shaped look of those distinctive scalloped valve covers, unlike anything else on the road. And that shape wasn't just for show. Pop the hood at a burger stand and everyone in the parking lot instantly knew what they were looking at. No badges required. That was part of the 409 mystique. The car itself could be a plain white Bel Air with dog dish hubcaps, but those valve covers were like a sheriff's badge under the hood. In an age before the internet, reputation traveled by word of mouth, and the 409's reputation traveled faster than the car itself. The weirdest combustion chambers in Detroit. Here's one for the mechanics in the audience. The 409 had one of the strangest cylinder head designs Detroit ever produced. On most V8 engines, the combustion chamber is a carved pocket in the cylinder head. Not on the W engine. Chevrolet's engineers machined the block deck at an angle instead of the usual flat 90 degrees, which meant the combustion chamber was formed mostly inside the cylinder itself, in a wedge between the slanted deck and the piston. The heads were nearly flat underneath. It was a clever trick for building compression cheaply, and it worked fine at truck engine speeds. But that odd chamber shape limited how well the engine could breathe at high RPM, which is part of why Chevrolet's engineers were already sketching its replacement. Racers didn't care about theory, though. They cared that the thing ran 12s. Sometimes an engineering oddball becomes a legend precisely because it succeeded in spite of itself. Solid lifters and Saturday rituals. Owning a top dog 409 came with homework. Both hot versions used solid mechanical valve lifters instead of the quiet, maintenance-free hydraulic units in ordinary engines. Solid lifters let the engine rev harder and hold its valve timing at high RPM without floating the valves, but they demanded regular valve lash adjustments to keep everything running in spec, and skipping the job cost you power. That meant pulling those beautiful scalloped valve covers, warming the engine, and working through all 16 valves with a feeler gauge and a wrench. For plenty of owners, it became a Saturday morning ritual: coffee on the fender, radio playing, checking clearances one rocker at a time. And you could hear the difference. A properly set 409 idled with a busy mechanical clatter, a sound enthusiast called sewing machine music. Neighbors called it something less flattering. Be honest, did you spend your Saturday mornings under a hood with a feeler gauge too, or was it just us? Let us know down below. The rear end couldn't take it. Here's the 409's dirty little secret. The engine was famously durable, built with truck-grade bones, a forged crankshaft, and a reputation for shrugging off abuse. The problem sat behind it. All that torque proved to be more than the factory ring and pinion gears were designed to handle, and under repeated hard launches, especially with sticky tires and a posi-traction differential hooking up hard, owners could strip a rear end. Drag racers learned quickly to treat rear gears as a consumable, like tires and spark plugs, and many kept a spare third member in the trunk on race day. Think about that, an engine so strong it destroyed the car around it. In a way, that fragility became a badge of honor. If your 409 had eaten a rear end or two, it meant you were actually using it the way the good Lord and Chevrolet intended. The tow truck drivers of 1962 certainly appreciated the business, supercar speed at a working man's price. Now let's talk money, because this is where the 409 Bel Air really shines. A Bel Air Sport Coupe started at roughly $2,600 in 1962, and adding the 409 with all the racing goodies still kept a well-equipped car in the neighborhood of $3,300 to $3,500 out the door. Folks at the time remember being stunned that a kid down the street could buy the fastest thing in town for around $3,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly the price of a basic new sedan today, except this one ran with anything in America. Compare that to a Corvette, which started hundreds of dollars higher and offered less room, or to the exotic European iron that cost 2 or 3 times as much. The 409 Bel Air was the working man's supercar, full stop. You could haul the family to church on Sunday and haul something very different down the strip on Saturday night. That rear window was a glassmaker's nightmare. Take a good look at the back of a bubble top sometime and appreciate what you're seeing. That enormous compound curved rear window wraps up into the roof and around the sides, giving the driver a view modern cars can only dream about. In an era before advanced glass forming, producing a piece that big with those curves was genuinely difficult and expensive work, and living with it had quirks all its own. On a summer day, all that glass turned the back seat into a solarium, which is why savvy owners ordered tinted glass or draped a blanket across the package tray. Parcel shelves faded, plastic toys melted, and more than one bag of groceries suffered back there. But, oh, that visibility, backing out of a parking space in a bubble top, you could see everything. Today we pay extra for backup cameras to recover a fraction of what that glass gave away for free. 1962 was the end of the line. Here's the fact that makes this car so collectible. The 1962 model year was the bubble top's last stand. When the 1963 Chevrolets arrived, every two-door hardtop in the full-size line wore the crisp, squared-off roof with its wide rear pillars, handsome in its own right, but the airy glass bubble was gone forever. The whole industry was moving in the same direction, toward formal roof lines that looked like convertibles with the top up, and toward the lighter, muscular intermediates like the GTO that were about to take over the performance world just 2 short years later. So the bubble top's entire run on the Bel Air lasted exactly 1 model year. 1. Nobody stood at the dealership in the fall of 1962 thinking they were watching a body style die. It was just next year's model with a different roof. That's how these things always go. The endings never announce themselves. You only recognize them looking back 20 years later, wishing you'd bought 2. Finding a real one is like finding a unicorn. Do the math with us here. Chevrolet built over 1 million full-size cars for 1962, but only 8,909 of them left the factory with a 409, and those engines were spread across Impalas, Bel Airs, and Biscaynes in every body style. Narrow it down to genuine 409 Bel Air bubble tops with the dual quad engine and a 4-speed, and you're talking about a sliver of a sliver. That's why serious collectors today obsess over date codes, casting numbers, and original paperwork, because for every real 409 bubble top, there are many tribute cars wearing transplanted engines. And to be fair, plenty of those transplants happened decades ago, when a worn-out 283 came out and a junkyard 409 went in. Which one on this list of facts surprised you the most so far? We read every single comment, so tell us down below and tell us if a real 409 ever lived on your street. It ran 12s straight off the showroom floor. Let's put the performance in perspective because the numbers still raise eyebrows. The General Motors Heritage Collection credits a properly equipped 1962 Bel Air 409 with a quarter mile in the low 13s bone stock, and race-prepped examples in the hands of men like Nicholson and Strickler dipped deep into the 12s at over 110 miles per hour. In 1962, that was rocket ship territory, quicker than nearly anything else sold to the public at any price. But here's the fun part. Those numbers hold up today. A mid-12 to low 13 second quarter mile will still show taillights to a whole lot of modern performance cars at your local strip, and the 409 did it with drum brakes, bias ply tires, barely wider than your hand, and a solid axle hopping across the pavement. The drivers of 1962 were managing all that fury with skinny steering wheels and courage. Respect your elders, indeed. From cheap car to 6-figure treasure, and that brings us to today. The 1962 Bel Air 409 bubble top, once the budget-conscious racer's choice, has become one of the most sought-after full-size Chevrolets ever built. Documented numbers-matching dual-quad cars with 4 speeds regularly command 6-figure money at the big auctions, and even honest project cars get bid up the moment the word bubble top appears in a listing. Funny how it works. The Impala SS got the glory in 1962, but the plain Jane Bel Air, the car people bought specifically because it was cheaper, is now the connoisseur's pick. Every surviving car carries the whole story with it: the Beach Boys' harmony, Dyno Don's midnight break-in run, grumpy Jenkins with a wrench in his hand, and a million teenage daydreams at a million stoplights. She's real fine, that 409. 64 years later, truer words have never been sung about a Chevrolet. If you enjoyed this, tell us in the comments what you'd like us to cover next. We've already got a long list, but the best ideas come from you. Most likes go straight onto it. Subscribe so you're here when it lands.